case you haven't seen it yet, Netflix has declared war on men and boys. Well, let me rephrase that. Not declared war, but continued to carry on their war against men and boys. Netflix's new series, Adolescence, opens up with a gruesome fictional murder, one where a 13-year-old boy kills a female classmate. Within minutes, the narrative starts steering viewers to question whether this boy represents something darker about all boys. Is violence woven into their DNA? Are boys and men inherently dangerous simply because they were born male? Oh, they don't come right out and say it, but to be sure, it's there. It's in the subtext, and that subtext isn't anything new. It's part of a broader cultural narrative that has taken hold in recent decades. The one that goes, it's all men till it's no men, and that all men are dangerous, or at least enough of them are that all women should just assume that they are, and thus be afraid. Now, because I know my critics will clip this to try and make it appear otherwise, let me state up front, let me be completely clear, let me state unequivocally, violence against women is real. It does happen, and far more than it should. And when it does happen, it should absolutely be taken seriously and prosecuted. But does it happen as much as they want you to believe? Does it happen to every woman every day, which is what they're trying to portray? The answer is no. And it leads us to another question that we should be asking but never do. Why is it we want to hold men, all men, accountable for the actions of a relative few, in fact, a relatively minuscule amount, yet at the same time actively refuse to do the same for women? Hi, my name is Dan, and you're watching Men Need to Be Heard, the channel dedicated to raising awareness on the issues that men and boys face in today's society. And today we're going to be answering those questions, as well as why Netflix and the writers and producers of Adolescence, in the end, aren't helping women but hurting them with their fictitious narrative. We're going to demonstrate how, through fictional content like Adolescence, which is then paired with sensationalist media coverage and selective storytelling, not to mention gads of social media input, has led to and cultivated a dangerous mindset. One that, as I said, not only demonizes men and boys indiscriminately, but in the end, ends up hurting women. Let's dive in. As I said earlier, the goal of the program, as even stated by the writers and producers, is to raise awareness on the issue of violence towards girls by boys. They want you to believe, and even go so far as to say, that it is rampant. So much so that girls and women should be spending their lives living in fear every minute of every day. Now, since the series takes place in the UK, I'm going to use that as a backdrop for my discussion. But let's be clear, this isn't solely a UK issue or narrative. It's a worldwide one. The fact is, if the premise of Adolescence were actually grounded in statistical reality, it might carry some cultural weight. But it isn't, not by a long shot. In fact, it's so ungrounded in reality, it might as well be flying along in the clouds of Venus. While the writers and producers want you to believe that there is an epidemic of 13-year-old boys killing their female classmates, that it is indeed an everyday thing, the reality says something completely different. And over the past couple of weeks, I've done the research, and despite digging through a ton of data, trying to find support for the premise put forth in Adolescence, what I actually found is that over the past 10 years in the United Kingdom, there has been one, let me repeat that, one documented case of a girl being murdered by a boy aged 12 to 14. That's one in a country of nearly 70 million people. That's not a trend. That's not an epidemic, as the producers and writers want you to believe. No, my friends, that's a statistical anomaly. And going a step further, because again, those same producers want to hide the other side of the story, there are also documented cases of girls in the very same age group also committing murder. Again, they're very few and far between, but there are cases of girls committing acts of extreme violence against others, especially women, such as the murder of Angela Wrightson in 2014. Funny how that part of the narrative was let completely out of the show. And the reason it was is because they want to hide the truth. They want to obfuscate reality in order to push an agenda of hate, of hatred against men and against boys. You see, they don't want to ignite national conversations about whether girls are inherently violent. Oh no, we can't have that. But yet, the exact goal of this film, as they have stated, was to ignite conversations about inherently violent boys are, even though, as we're showing, they aren't. The reality is there is, as I said earlier, an agenda at work here. One that I argue is deliberately designed to hurt women by making them live in fear of men. The goal is to create as much rancor and division between the sexes to achieve some purpose. What that purpose is, who knows, but whatever it is actually leading to something. And that something is the end of society as we know it. Hollywood and the media's tendency to laser focus on the rare instances of male-perpetrated violence while ignoring the mountain of evidence contradicting a broader pattern, well, that creates a distorted view of reality, but a view that has taken hold. And this distortion feeds into a societal fear, one that encourages women and girls to be perpetually suspicious of men and boys, not just in dangerous contexts, but in everyday interactions. It's teaching women to always assume the worst, to read negativity into any thoughts, feelings, or actions of men, no matter how innocuous they are. And it's leading to women making false allegation after false allegation based on those assumptions, which in turn is causing men to reject women and reject society as a whole. That is not good. And programs like Adolescence only exacerbate the issue. But it runs much deeper than that. This fear trickles down in other disturbing ways. Teachers who are overwhelmingly female also assume the worst of boys. School administrators, who again are mostly female, now believe in anti-boy paradigms and thus punish them more harshly, even for things they didn't do. And mothers, well, mothers are growing increasingly suspicious of their sons. So much so that there is now a growing trend calling for mothers to terminate their pregnancy if they find out the fetus is a male. Let that sink in for a moment. We've actually reached the point where women and women's groups are actively advocating for selective breeding. Who said 1984 was a work of fiction? And let's ask another question that no one wants brought up, which is, what about the boys? From birth, boys are taught to view themselves as potential threats before they've even formed an identity. They're told that they're inherently dangerous, toxic, something to be ridiculed and feared for no other reason than they were born male. And they're told this day after day. They're told that they're unwanted and unneeded. They're told that they're a drain on society and that the world would be better off, far better off, without them. They are dehumanized and demeaned starting at a very young age to the point that eventually they start to see themselves as something that does need to be removed from society. And yet we stand and wonder why so many have internalized shame simply for existing as male. We stand and wring our hands asking ourselves, why are so many boys unaliving themselves instead of seeking help? Well, my friends, the answer is right in front of us. The problem isn't the boys. The problem is us, though we as a society aren't willing or ready to admit that yet. The effects of this societal narrative go deeper than hurt feelings, something that was touched on in the film but largely buried or dismissed in the story. As the show continued, we found that Jamie, the boy who committed the murder, was actually being bullied by the girl he ended up killing. Now again, I gotta say this, I know my critics are gonna clip that to make it appear that I condone what he did. But let's be very clear yet again, I don't condone it in any way. But trying to silence a discussion on the cause doesn't help anyone, up to and including the fictional victim. Bullying of boys by girls has always existed, but in the social media era, it has increased to untold levels. Girls bully boys in a myriad of ways, up to and including making threats to tell everyone that the boys did something inappropriate to them. And the fact is, even when those girls are caught, they aren't held accountable. The issue is dismissed or glossed over, which is exactly what was done in Adolescence. The writers and producers had a chance to illustrate a very real problem and how that problem could lead to devastating consequences for all involved. But instead, they chose to dismiss it, to downplay it, to hide it even, lest it run counter to their stated goal of portraying boys as inherently evil. According to the Office for National Statistics, ONS, about 35% of UK children aged 10 to 15 reported being bullied in person in 2023. A horrific number to be sure. But did you know that boys and girls were bullied at nearly equal rates? A little under 34% for boys and right about 36% for girls. But when you consider the fact that boys are far less likely to report it, lest they face ridicule for doing so, those numbers don't even begin to tell the true story. Yet, there's no mention of those facts anywhere in the film. Nor is there any mention of the reality that it's the girls who more often engage in social and verbal bullying, and the boys who are more frequently on the receiving end of it. No, instead the makers of the film want you to believe it's the exact opposite, even going so far as to claim it's the manosphere that's driving it. Going further, studies from the British Educational Research Journal have found that girls do bully boys, and as I mentioned earlier, usually get a pass from both peers and adults when they do. Thus, they continue to do it until, sadly, sometimes the boy they've targeted, often for years, breaks. I've long argued about the fact that the rise in school shootings is directly related to the rise of bullying by girls of boys in social media. But no one wants to have that conversation. No one wants to look into or research that reality. Instead, they seek to hide it. Blaming the gun, blaming the manosphere, blaming the boys. Blaming anyone and anything they can to avoid acknowledging the possible correlation of girls bullying boys and those boys eventually going on horrific killing sprees. Again, I'm not saying that to justify the actions of those boys, but could we at least have a conversation and acknowledge that being relentlessly and mercilessly bullied for years might be having an effect? And on top of that, can we also discuss how boys are consistently told that they're evil, unwanted, and unneeded, and how that also might be playing a role in what's going on? And if we can't do that, can we at least have a conversation that the dehumanization and complete and utter lack of empathy towards boys and their issues might be the very thing creating the lack of empathy in those boys, especially when they go too far and snap? The answer, at least right now, is no. No, we can't. Any such talk is dismissed, silenced, the issues swept under the rug. All because society isn't primed, isn't ready to acknowledge that men and boys can also be victims. And it's most definitely not ready to allow men and boys to actually be victims. But they most certainly are. And the consequences can be fatal. Fatal to others and fatal to the boys. From 2005 to 2014, sadly, 59 boys aged 10 to 14 committed suicide in the United Kingdom. That's almost 60 times the number of murders committed by boys in the very same time period. Yet, no one cares. Going further, it reveals that a significant number of those deaths, up to 22% among all youth suicides, involved documented experiences of bullying. The key phrase being documented. Others that weren't documented aren't included in that number, and they're likely many. Other research has found that being both a victim and perpetrator of bullying, a bully victim as it's known, significantly increases the risk of suicidal thoughts and actions. Yet nowhere during adolescence is that even mentioned. Again, the why is because it runs counter to the narrative that they want to create, the one they want you to believe, the one that says teenage boys are killers, something to be feared, something to be controlled. But the facts are, the boys in this range are not killers. No, my friends, what they are is casualties. Casualties of a false narrative that Netflix and the show's makers have deliberately chosen to spread. And we're going to dive deeper into that. Let's explore how the agenda of adolescence, while claiming to be about exposing toxic masculinity, is actually exposing just how deep toxic femininity runs. Adolescence serves as a textbook example of feminist projection and propaganda, and the tendency to attribute one's own harmful behavior to a group that you wish to demonize. In this case, a girl bullies a boy so relentlessly he snaps and ends up killing her. A tragedy to be sure, but also something that perhaps could have been prevented had something been done about it before the tragedy happened. I find it interesting, but not surprising in the least, that nowhere in the show was that mentioned or explored. And it doesn't stop there. During the show, another girl violently assaulted a boy on the schoolyard. In fact, she did it right in front of the officers that were investigating the murder. And what happens to her? What is the response to it by the police officers? Nothing. Really, nothing. In fact, she faces no repercussions at all other than a talking to by a school administrator. A talking to which in reality was designed to portray her violent assault on an innocent boy as justified. That it was okay. And that is the message they are sending. But the producers don't stop there with their projections and innuendo. They actually had the audacity to claim that the insult so many women and girls hurl towards men, calling them incels, was actually born from the male online spaces. They actually went so far to claim that it is other men and boys hurling it, not girls, not women. I mean, spend 5 minutes on any day of the week in the comment section of my videos where women hurl the term incel as casually as they would swat a fly. And while, yes, every once in a while a male, almost always a male feminist, will use the term, the fact of the matter is, it is 99.99% women who are doing it. And it's not just to me or in the comments on my videos, but across all of social media, all of society. Yet the producers want you to suspend what your eyes are seeing and your ears are hearing. They don't want you to know, don't want you to believe what's right in front of you. They knowingly and deliberately seek to place the blame elsewhere, on men. Again, this outright misrepresentation is designed to do one thing and one thing only: to demonize men and boys while excusing the behavior of women and girls. The very people who popularized the term within pop culture are now weaponizing it against vulnerable boys, just in a different way. They do so they can then turn around and blame the so-called manosphere and hope to silence it. Silence it for speaking out on their behavior and what they've been doing to men and boys. And this has long been a tenet of feminism, where they blame their words, their deeds, and their actions on the very victims that they've targeted for decades. And the makers of Adolescence and Netflix have loudly joined that chorus and continue to do so throughout the series. This narrative bait and switch happens repeatedly. Another example is in an episode where the show's female therapist character, one who is supposedly a neutral figure, yet repeatedly ignores the boy's relentless bullying and victimization. Instead, she pathologizes his natural emotions, normal curiosity, and teenage struggles as toxic, dangerous, and predatory, and in turn goads him into reacting negatively by continuing to push him. She does it largely to then use that in her diagnosis. A diagnosis, I'd argue, she had already come to before she even set foot in the room. And what's interesting is that mirrors the reality of what is actually going on when men seek treatment and assistance from the mental health profession today. Throughout the episode, every natural male impulse is demonized, while the equally harmful behavior of the female characters, that's downplayed, excused, or outright ignored. To be fair, though, the therapist actually does one very good job, which is representing the inherent toxic, anti-male misandrous mindset that permeates the mental health profession in 2025. She quite clearly represents the larger issue within modern mental health care, the entrenched anti-male bias that alienates boys and men and discourages them from seeking help. Imagine if instead of portraying therapists as seeing the boys as unworthy of sympathy, caring, or support, they showed the opposite. Imagine if instead of trying to demonize the boy, and all boys for that matter, they brought forth a discussion about how the murder could have been prevented if someone, anyone, had taken seriously the struggles the boy was facing. But no, rather than encouraging men and boys who are struggling to seek help, they do the exact opposite. The producers demonstrate how the mental health profession seeks to blame the victim. And open-minded viewers watching will see that very clearly. See very clearly why so many men and boys refuse to go to therapy. And I'd argue why they should. The fictional depiction mirrors the very real-life experiences that I've personally heard from literally thousands and thousands of men. And I argue that most men go through when they do seek therapeutic help. And this show is only going to further cement that belief. To its credit, in this case, it actually does portray the truth. The truth that men report being dismissed, pathologized, and blamed for the very abuse they endure when they try to get help. And to its credit, it shows the true agenda that has worked against men at every level for decades. Now let's dig further into that agenda, shall we? The show's producers, while trying to be coy, actively reveal their true agenda through their selective framing of the story. They demand viewers mourn the girl victim while refusing to acknowledge that Jamie, the boy protagonist, is also a victim of relentless bullying and abuse. Now, to be fair, they do pay some lip service to it, but not to highlight the issue, but instead actually dismiss it. His suffering is denied any sympathy, any real acknowledgement, simply because he happens to be a male. His trauma, his family's grief, and his father's anguish are presented not as understandable human emotions, but examples of toxic masculinity. So much so that academia and women's groups are advocating for the film to be shown to students in schools at all levels as an example of just how prevalent toxic masculinity is. Again, I ask you, take a step back and consider that for a moment. Though women's groups themselves are saying the producers have done such a good job pushing the false narrative that now they want others to use this film, a work of fiction, a work based not on reality but falsehoods and stereotypes, to educate girls on just how dangerous boys and men are, and to teach the boys that they are inherently dangerous. And yet you want to tell me there isn't an agenda at work here? Yeah, okay. In short, the goal of the show, the goal of Netflix itself, is to portray men and boys as inherently evil. However, to those with an open mind, Adolescence actually perfectly illustrates how our culture scapegoats boys, silences their struggles, and manufactures consent for their mistreatment under the guise of feminism and social progress. It shows how it's not toxic masculinity that is rampant, but toxic femininity. And that is having devastating consequences on men, on boys, and on society. Let's explore that. Sadly, as we've shown, the producers and writers of the show, as well as Netflix itself, have shown they don't care about facts, don't care about the pain and trauma that boys go through, don't care about boys or their issues in any way, shape, or form. Instead, they seek to perpetuate a stereotype, a myth, one that feminism has spent decades promulgating, where they want to create a mindset that men and boys deserve what's coming to them, deserve to be mistreated, deserve to be punished because of the supposed actions of their forebears, actions which are largely as much a work of fiction as Adolescence is. And they don't care what the results of that agenda are in the long term. They don't care what happens to a boy who grows up being told by culture, entertainment, and authority figures that he's inherently bad. They don't care if it causes him to unalive himself. In fact, in some cases, they actually relish it, saying that in their minds, it's one less potential rapist to have to worry about down the road. They only seek to blame all the boys, blame all the men. To them, it's a good thing to silence those boys to prevent them from seeking help or getting it. They want the message to be something different, something that men have been told should be their only response to the abuse, trauma, or really any issue that they face. And that is to sit down, shut up, and deal with it. They want everyone to believe that real men don't have emotions, aren't allowed to have them, and that if you are a man, if you have emotions, well, there's something wrong with you. And what happens to a boy who's had that drilled into him from birth? He learns to stay quiet. He withdraws from others. He may even begin to believe he deserves mistreatment. And those behaviors are something that we are seeing more and more in boys every single day. And no one cares. Rather than address the issue, rather than address the cause, no, they're choosing to attack the victim, the boys. In the end, the real crime that occurs is that this alienation leads to a loss of empathy by many boys. A loss of empathy, not just for themselves, but anyone around them. After all, why should these boys care about anyone else or for society as a whole when no one cares about them? If boys are consistently told that they are, or portrayed as, toxic, violent, and dangerous, why are we shocked when they start to believe it themselves? Why does it surprise us when these boys check out of social life altogether? Or worse, lash out in anger. Rather than have some understanding, some compassion, as I said, we choose to blame the victim and continue to produce media like Adolescence to fan the flames. We are quite literally the Dr. Frankensteins who are creating the monster. Let's call Adolescence what it really is. Misandry, plain and simple. The constant portrayal of boys and men as violent threats, as is the theme throughout the series, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, is nothing short of bigotry. It's a form of hatred and societal prejudice that dehumanizes half the population under the guise of protecting the other half. If we genuinely cared about safety, about justice, and about equality, we would tell the truth. And that includes telling the truth about boys, their struggles, and their issues, not creating fictional stories to perpetuate a lie, a stereotype. It's time we portrayed boys for what they are, human beings. Human beings who deserve to be treated with respect, who deserve to be cared for, not tossed aside, not demonized. Contrary to what the producers at Netflix want you to believe, boys are not ticking time bombs. They are not monsters in the making. They are children, many of whom are struggling, many of whom are hurting, and many of whom need and deserve our empathy far more than our suspicion. But adolescence doesn't reflect that reality. It chooses to reflect a fantasy. It reflects our cultural bias against men and against boys. In the end, I argue it gives us a mirror to look in. A mirror that reflects the systemic hatred of men and boys that has existed in our society for decades now. And isn't it time we started questioning why we're so comfortable vilifying our sons instead of helping them? So what can we do? Well, first off, we all need to start speaking up and calling this out. We need to tell Netflix to stop pushing and funding these false narratives. It can start by doing something as simple as giving a thumbs down on the show. You might not think it's much, but if tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands did just that, trust me, it will get noticed. They're going to wonder why, and the advertisers who pay for it are going to be asking questions. It can also start by reaching out to Netflix's CEOs, Greg Peters and Ted Sarandos, and asking them, why are you perpetuating a falsehood? Why don't you value men? Why don't you value boys and the issues they face? I've actually sent emails to them asking those very questions. We also need to call out the producers and writers of Adolescence, Jack Thorne and Stephen Graham, and ask them about their outright lies and misrepresentations. We need to be asking them, why are they seeking to demonize boys instead of helping them? And we need to call them out for their misandry until they get the message. Get the message that we're not going to tolerate it anymore. For far too long, we've stood by and let this happen. And now our boys, our men, our society is suffering. We're all suffering. And we need to push back when the media leans into tired, harmful tropes. We need to demand more balanced, honest portrayals of men and boys in film, television, and journalism. We need to acknowledge that boys need help and support their mental health. Support anti-bullying programs that include boys as legitimate victims, that actually admit they can be victims, something most of them don't do right now. And most of all, we need to refuse to stay silent while an entire gender is mischaracterized and mislabeled. We need to say it's time to stop the toxic war on masculinity, because the truth is, boys are not the danger. It's we as a society who perpetuate the myth that they are, who is the real danger. And if we aren't willing to admit it, if we don't admit it, society as we know it is going to cease to exist. So what do you think? Where do you stand on this issue? Did you watch Adolescence? And what was your thoughts coming out of it? Did you say anything about it? Let me know down in the comments. And I encourage you to share this video with others so that we can spread the word and call out the misandry inherent in Adolescence and programs like it. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and follow the channel. Hit that notification bell so you're made aware when I release new videos. All right, until next time, this is Dan. Thanks for watching and have an awesome day.